Today, we've got two killer listener questions. One is to do with procrastination in Agile team members, and the other one is on the difference between being and doing Agile. And what I love most about these questions is that they go to the heart of our philosophy. That's this week on the Badass Agile podcast. Greetings, team. Welcome to the Badass Agile podcast. I'm your host, Chris Williams. Folks, friends, welcome back. Thank you for being here week in and week out. I really appreciate you being a follower, being a true believer. I'm grateful for each and every one of you. Well, look, let's dig in on these listener questions, but first, let's remember why we're here. To create an elite tribe of leaders who truly serve their clients and communities by doing what matters and what works, relentlessly chasing value and excellence like a badass. There's so many resources about what you need to do to be agile, but we're focused on who you need to become in order to lead teams. So let's hammer down those fundamentals to create a unique and powerful force in this industry. Now, if this helps you, tell your friends. Or don't. We'll keep it a secret. Don't forget to check out my daily Agile inspirations for leaders by subscribing to my email list. You get a preview of next week's posts and a free inspirational video every Monday to help you align your week with strength and focus delivered straight to your inbox. You can also submit your coaching and leadership questions for me to answer on an upcoming episode. All this at badassagile.com. So sign up and post your questions today. Now, these questions go to the heart of my philosophy. The first question reminds us that there's nothing about Agile or Scrum or Kanban that smart, hard-working people wouldn't get done anyway. The second question reminds us that it's not about the practices you memorize, but about the mindset and habit pairs that you internalize and practice that make Agile actually work well. See, Agile, Scrum, and Kanban, they're all about minimum rails, as I call it. By that I mean enough process to fix most of your common problems and enough flexibility built into it and simplicity to shape them to fit the uncommon problems when they arise. All right, the first question was, procrastinators are known to come up with the best ideas because they use their time to think. I don't know about that, but how can we successfully bring the procrastinators on our team on board to daily Scrum to show progress and next steps? Okay, well, look, to cure a procrastinator, there may be a point where you need some degree of carrots and sticks to get them in the team room initially. But after that, we really don't want to use that kind of motivation. If you focus your daily stand-ups on making and keeping promises to each other, which is what I prescribe, then you're golden. So let's review that. Stand-ups are not status meetings, and if people feel like they are, they're not going to go, especially if they're classic procrastinators who really don't want anyone to shine a light on their progress or status. So what we try to do with stand-ups instead is to make them about a culture of making and keeping promises. And if even that sounds scary, the idea is that there's nothing wrong with breaking a promise so long as you tell the team about what it is you need in order to keep that promise or adjust the date of the promise. Now, that's the part we called out, what are your blockers, right? See, most people value loyalty intrinsically, or they fear losing face in front of others. So bringing the idea of honor and keeping promises to one another and keeping them from losing face by saying, if you didn't keep a promise, you've got an out. And that out is declaring your blocker. Because we do these every day, the worst we can go is one full day before finding out that something that we were working on has gone off the rails. And if you further follow my advice of making it so that most of the items that your team plans on the Scrum board are about a day in size, then there's no such thing as having a 5-day task where we go Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday morning find out that there was a blocker. So if you sculpt and structure your Scrum practices correctly, the stand-up is basically a daily commitment to your updated small, manageable promises, which really helps procrastinators not get overwhelmed by the bigness of the thing, and not fear being exposed as someone who, is either lazy or starts their work too late or just doesn't get their stuff done. Now, also, when people think of MVP, they think about massive or master project scope. Use MVP in everything you do. When stuff goes off the rail for teams, renegotiate the scope. People say, well, I promised I would get this done, and I couldn't get it done. All right, what can you get done? What can be done, completed, checked in, and ready to move to the next person by the end of today? When you do that, when you become a constant negotiator for the highest value with the least amount of effort, people come to respect the fact that you're not task mastering. You're not monitoring their progress or their output. And I find they really appreciate that. Now, if people are procrastinating to the point where work's not getting started to the 11th hour, that's a big problem. That's the overwhelm problem. And here, once again, by breaking big things into smaller things and constantly refocusing on MVP, if scope blows up or changes, you help people become successful and you make it easier for them to start planning and executing way before the 11th hour. Another thing you have to do is that when people break promises, you can't have a punitive culture. You can't treat that like it's a bad thing. You can't frown on it. You have to treat it like it's just news. It's not bad news. It's not good news. It's just news. Now that I know, I can act. That's the purpose of raising a blocker. It's not for blaming or shaming people. Now you roll all those practices together and then add to that when you get to retrospective, if we're still not performing at our peak, we have one more chance to point out, hey guys, I think collectively we as a team could afford to start tasks sooner. Or if you're good at having frank conversations and you've built a great team culture, you might actually be able to say, look, the times when we start things at the 11th hour, I think we shoot ourselves in the foot and we do each other a grave disservice. We need to be better. Wouldn't it be great to be able to have that kind of conversation at that level? Because again, a procrastinator fears what? They fear success, they fear failure, or they fear hard work. One of the three or bits of all both. The best way to overcome that fear and help them through it so that they don't procrastinate is give them a safe place to fail in all three of those dimensions. And I think that Agile and Scrum have rails that you can put up to help them do that, and the daily stand-up is exactly that set of rails. But also leverage your sprint planning technique, breaking down to the daily level, and using retrospectives as ways to continuously reflect with one another and help team members push each other to their highest performance. All right, I hope that helps. The second question, how do you differentiate between doing Agile versus being Agile? Aha. Well, this one I really like. I'll tell you why. Because Badass Agile is about and has always been about the fact that you can learn Scrum and you can learn all the Agile games and you can learn all the different retrospective techniques. And I think you should. I don't mean to discredit people who study and preach the fine art and science of doing Scrum or Agility well. I'm against complex frameworks, but again, the guys who are talking about this stuff and really moving the dial forward and constantly creating new practices and techniques and observing and commenting, they're moving the game forward for all of us. So I have a deep respect for people who are technique and practice oriented. But that's not what I do. If you need that kind of help, go find those guys. There's great podcasts, there's great websites, there's great video content. You can take training. It's everywhere, but that's not my game. Where I think the gap is that I don't think perfect technique makes Agile fully successful. Because what you're dealing with when Agile really fails is not a lack of technique. It's the fear and the mindsets and the unwillingness to change and the inability to support teams properly. That kills everything before you get started. So if you want Agile to be successful, what you have to be good at is the thing that's never taught in schools, which is how to influence, how to radiate the kind of confidence and power and certainty that people are craving when they build complex processes like waterfall in the first place. So that's what we're here to do. That's the being Agile part. So let's dig in on the question. How do you differentiate between doing Agile versus being Agile? Doing Agile is all about the technique. Those things are easy to learn. but they present two major risks that you have to consider. Number one, when you focus on individual technique, we forget to focus on the bigger picture and the underlying principles that help us when we encounter situations that are outside the ordinary. And number two, we create unnecessary complexity under the assumption that more information is better, when really, we ought to be integrating information into a cohesive whole that drives our leadership game. Now, to me, being agile means applying agile principles to your leadership game. For example, continuously inspecting and adapting yourself, applying value-based prioritization and iterative planning, execution, and measurement to your growth. See, this approach not only teaches you how to be a better agilist, but a better leader as well. Being agile, to me, means that all of the doing parts, the doing agile parts, are not just randomly rehearsed and practiced like some kind of script that you run, but they're part of a growing leader who teaches other people how to be nimble, adaptive, emotionally resistant, persistent, and fearless. Do you see the difference? I think it's an important distinction. It's great to do agile, but what we really need on top of that are people who can be agile. Folks, thanks for listening. You can reach out at badassagile.com or find me on Twitter at badass_agile. I'll see you next time, and until then, stay badass.